try to go very basic, and then I'll let you go through the presentation and see how we use science in terms of color measurement. Not just by our experience, but the science itself. Okay, so just a brief presentation with X-Rite. We are part of the global leader in color science and technology. I don't know if you're familiar with Pantone. There are some food industry that use the Pantone for color references. We manufacture, market, and support any color measurement device. So we are in a lot of industries, so including printing, packaging, photography. So just think about pigments and dyes. If there is pigment and dyes in your process, definitely X-Rite will be part of your color management control. So including food. So right now our corporate office is located in Michigan. We have 32 countries, including our partners here of SNAPS for Malaysia. I represent Asia, Southeast Asia market. I belong to the Singapore regional office, but I'm from the Philippines, so I work also for them. Okay, so these are some of the famous brands that are currently using our brand or our equipment. And now we go to the main topic. Okay, so let's understand first what we mean by conventional approach. How people appreciate color and how we determine color by number. This is an application of basic color theory. So what is conventional approach? Okay. So normally in color mixing, of course, we start with specifying the target color standard. We must have a standard. Okay. And then you will select, probably some of you might do some mixing like this before you go to that color and say, this is my final product. Of course, you have your recipe. And part of your recipe, you have your dyes, whatever condiments that you use. So that is part of your color recipe. Then you weigh those all around, you mix them, you correct them, you record them, and how long this will take this process. Okay? So it depends normally on how complicated or how simple is your process. It can be seconds or it can be days. And the next question is, how reliable is the conventional color matching? Now we are now going into reliability. What do we mean by that? When you measure your color standard, normally it starts with a physical sample. And then a physical sample will always go constant change. Why? Because of handling and storage. Dirty hands and contaminated samples. Definitely here in a food, you want as much as possible do not contaminate the sample. Some goes in the plastic bag. Your plastic bag may keep changing, okay? And that will also affect your color measurement. So handling and storage. And then how do you monitor your color? How do you monitor your color? Is your current color quality control sufficient? How do you monitor your color strength? How weak or strong the color? Okay, so how do you do it? Do you do some record? Do you provide, how do you record? How you check the consistency? How do you check the repeatability? And sometimes there is some certain application where they have to do color formulation. So it also depends on your color library. Maybe I'm talking here a little bit more advanced because there are some software that can do formulation. But I think for you, you don't really need the formulation part because you only need what we call the color quality control, which is the QC part. But at least you should be able to monitor your color quality. Okay. So what is the first tool used in color conventional approach? It's the eye. Definitely the eye. The eye is a good tool but not sufficient. Okay. It relies mainly on individual eye and brain limitation. Sometimes in Philippines we call this mata meter or isometer. Isometer. Okay, so So it depends. It really depends on your experience, depends on, there will be always a memory loss, and later on you can see in the presentation, the eye easily get fatigued. No matter how good our experience is, there is always a limitation because we as a human being, we always get tired easily. And also the most important, depending on viewing condition. The background, your light will always affect your color visual assessment. And then color difference are difficult to quantify and to communicate. Because everybody they have their own experience on how they communicate color to one person may be different when this person received the communication. Because when you say more red, maybe when you realize more red, maybe it's a different red tone on his mind. So the communication is always keep changing. Unless you make some, what we call, some kind of a way or a method to be able to communicate the color difference. So if we try to understand what is color, if we use the meaning from the word color, it is the byproduct of spectrum of light and is reflected or absorbed as you see by the human eye and processed by the human brain. So if I have a color here, and then the light goes to the color, that material will absorb and reflect the light. The light that you see is the reflected light. The light that you don't see is what we call the absorbed light. So if you notice the light here is like the rainbow. Rainbow has 7 colors. So colors is always there. But you see yellow because the yellow is being reflected and this is what you see. But the other component of the light is being already absorbed by the material. And that material depends on how thick is the material, what is your formulation, it all affects your color perception. So how do we normally look at the color? Okay, so let's practice here what is common practice used in color appreciation. So how does the individual affect the perception of color? Inherited, it's learned. Okay, for you in the color business, you learn this from your work. Okay, you learn this from your school. It's also geographic, depending on which country. People in US or people in Asia have a different way of looking at the color. In fact, the most sensitive person in terms of color are from Asia. They really see a lot. They see something, sometimes our counterpart in US might find it too tight for them. And then the climate and of course the light. So let's use your eyes here. Okay, so how many dots do you actually see? Or how many white and black dots that you actually see? Can you count? None. And it's keep changing. Yeah, because it means, but if you only look one dot, just focus, you only see one color, and that is white. So meaning, our eyes is really affected by surrounding. They focus. If you don't focus, you don't see or you don't learn. So focus is very important. And eyes has to be focused. That's why we say the eye factor. So your eyes also. So it really, environment really affects our perception of things. Okay, not only colors but perception of
This
things.
is black and white. If we put the color like red, yellow, also
Okay.
the same.
Yes, the same. Yes, the same. Yeah. So focus.
Focus.
If you try to drive your car, you see when you drive the car and you have a lot of this like beam and then you park. Sometimes you get confused, right? Because sometimes you might hit when you drive, let's say you park backing and then there is a too big beam, right? It's there. Sometimes you have to you need to be very careful because otherwise it just confuses your brain when I might hit this. So really, if you don't focus, you have to be aware that you have this beam because that beam actually that's engineering already designed. You should not be able to beat that. But somehow, when you look at it, somehow you might feel that you might hit. And then sometimes, will my car fit in this line, right? Because of this, a lot of this what we call confusion that our eyes can easily be distracted. Now, this is very simple, maybe magical. I think some of you might have seen this in some of the email. They pass it. It's like a magic trick. So something is moving, but actually it doesn't move. So when you look at the color, the first thing we look at the color in the design world is always on the monitor. When you design packaging, and you can see all this color in your surrounding, they all use the monitor to produce the product. They do the design in the monitor. And this one, it moves, looks moving, but actually it's not moving. And this kind of problem is what we call spatial effects. So the positioning of lines and object can cause optical illusions. Okay, that greatly affecting your color vision. So optical illusions. I mean, when you do your packaging, sometimes those packaging design people who make your product very good, they use some kind of optical illusion. So we call it spatial effects. Now, this is another test. When you see very bright color, when you try to focus only on the X, just only on the X, don't look, I mean, you see this too bright color in between the X, but you just focus on the X. And then I will remove that too bright color. Sometimes you might see like flashing. That bright color is flashing, right? Okay. And then if I remove that, you see that it's flashing. Sometimes there is an after image. And this is a Canadian flag, which we believe, but it's green. But later on, it will become good. So you focus again on the center. This is a small circle here. And then suddenly becomes big. And this is what we call retinal fatigue. So a brief exposure of color gives an after image, right? So when you look at your color, you have this, sometimes when you look at the color, you have to take rest. Okay. Maybe when you communicate your color, it's not the problem of the color. Maybe your eyes is getting tired looking at that color. So you really need to rest your eye. Don't look at the color for too long. A color matching that does not have to look at the color for too long. Otherwise, you confuse your brain and confuse your eyes because you get tired. Okay, so we call it retinal fatigue. And here is another color trick, okay? So when you see here this alternate color of gray, yellow, and green, then this is the green or the cyan, then you have the gray. So you see here, this appear as stronger or darker gray, and this one appear to be lighter. Because this one, is covered by the yellow, the background is green. This one, the background is yellow and the gray on top. But actually, this gray color are the same color. So your background affects the color that you are looking at. And these are definitely the same color. It's just this background affects your color. So sometimes it depends on the background. So what we recommend, if you look at the color, you must use what we call a neutral gray background. Don't look at the color where there is a lot of what we call influence from the background, because you cannot always see it and you cannot be consistent in color evaluation. The same thing here. So you can see here, this color blue here and the color blue there. If I remove this on the center, there are the same blue color. And what we call this the background effects or the chameleon effects. So color changes their appearance. So the color is not changing, but the appearance is changing. And this is what, so be aware of your color of your. Sometimes when you do your packaging, you design your packaging and then, or maybe you evaluate the color, try to put it in a neutral background. Don't put anything behind, sometimes maybe a white or a black paper. That's okay because those are neutral color. Maybe there is something behind also because the color here, light travels, and that light affects your color. What you are. Okay. So that's why we say always be aware of your field. Another, this is a blue color, and then that is also a blue color. So do you see the blue before and the blue now different or the same? Yeah, it's different, but can you tell me how different? It's quite far, right? And this is what we call full color memory. Nobody can memorize color exactly. It's not number. When you say one, it's one. But when you say color blue, maybe you say, yeah, that's the blue that I want. But when you compare it to your actual product that you want, and you start comparing, a while ago I think that's the bright blue I want, but actually it's not bright blue because we cannot memorize it exactly. We just have a little idea, but we don't memorize it. We just know the generic. But when it comes to comparison, you need to compare it when you go into judging. Have to compare it side by side. So the color cannot be memorized. And again, there are certain things like color blindness. Some people may not be able to recognize what number inside. So what number inside? 42. Yes. Some people cannot see the 42. So it's one test of what we call color blindness test. So color blindness, 1 in every 30 males suffer from red-green color blindness, and 1 in every 300. That's the sum. Yes, that's a fact. Yes. So it's genetically, yes, inherited from your parents. Yeah. Correct. So color blindness. So again, so maybe a lot of you are not aware. When you look at the color, so the color here you see, this one is using fluorescent lamp, this kind of lamp. This one is using incandescent lamp. But both materials are the same. But how come this color here appears different here? Because this becomes more red because the incandescent lamp have a lot of red energy. While this fluorescent lamp has a lot of blue energy. That's why this material change the color. When you go to department store, even Mark & Spencer has a different light because they specify what light source they would like to use. So when you view color, you have to be consistent. Don't view your color in a very changing, always change your environment. As much as possible, get a light boot, and in the light boot, you look at the color inside the light boot because that's where you can always attain consistency. You have to be consistent. So you need to control some of the environment. So we call it lighting condition. Failure to adapt standard viewing condition often results in a poor color decision. Because sometimes your eyes may be good, but because of the changing environment, your color vision, your decision might be not be consistent anymore. Okay, so that's why science said with a lot of these factors that we need to take care, okay, then we need some kind of device to measure color. And we have here color determination by number. It is a process to provide consistent and readable color throughout your color quality control. Color matching that is fast and easy to use. However, it involves the use of spectrophotometer, and we need a software for quality assurance software or a formulation software. Here, you just need a quality control software and application of what we call the basic color theory. So now we use science to applicate the basic of color. Okay. So we call this, think about, if you have meter to measure the length, if you have kilogram to measure the weight, or pounds to measure the weight. In color, there is a weight. But in color, it's a little bit more complex science because we use what we call a three-dimensional. It's not single dimension, it's not double or two-dimension, it's three-dimensional. When we say, if we go back again, so we say perception, you have the light that hit the sample, and then you have your brain that process the color. So this is what make up what we call the color perception. Color perception is composed of the light, the object, and the eye, which is our brain later on process. So color, actually the science only started in 1931. So it's a very new science, and it's made a group of science that are based in France. Okay, so it's a French word. So I don't want to pronounce because I don't get. So I will go for English term, International Commission on Illumination. They are the group of science that provides the most consistent and efficient method of color communication in all industrial and graphic arts reproduction. And this, we have, okay, I don't want to go there because okay, so let's go first. Okay, so there are the group of scientists. Okay, first we need to define the light source. We need to define the object, and we need to define the eye. Okay, so when we need to define the eye, color science said we need to know what should be the standard observer, the people looking at the color, what should be the standard illuminant, the object that illuminates the sample, and how do you measure all these colors. So they are all contributed in this two terms. We call it Rice-Steady-Luz, and we call it also sometimes chromaticity coordinates. It's a little bit technical, but I want to jump. Okay, so first, as I said, color start with the light, and the light has a very big spectrum. So you go back to your physics, and in the physics we know that there is an ultraviolet light, and there is what we call the infrared, the microwave. So these are light energy. The light that we see is what we call the visible light, and this is the rainbow color. And in the visible light, we measure it in terms of wavelength. Okay? So every color, every light is actually equivalent to 1 nanometer, which is equivalent to 25 million nanometer in 1 inch. That's why we have the nona, and the nona energy now is the nanometer is very, very smooth, very, very small size of particles. And that is color. Okay? Color is now measured so in terms of nanometer. So if you divide the color is divided into 7 groups. This is similar to the rainbow color. Rainbow after the sun, because the sun, as soon as it gets out after the rain, then there is still a rain particles. As soon as the light hits those rain particles, it will be dispersed, and as soon as it disperses, you have the seven colors of the rainbow. So we call it the Roy G. Biv color. The red, the orange, the red, the orange, the yellow, the green, the blue, the indigo, and the violet. So Roy G. Biv. Every light that we have here in color science need to be defined. Because why? Sometimes when you look at the color, you look at on this light. Sometimes you go outside to look at it inside the sunlight. And sometimes you look at it inside the incandescent lamp. And in color science, you need to define this. And this is how they define it. So first, what we use right now is what we call the D65. Okay? And then the second light choice that we use is what we call the indoor light, is the CWF, which is similar to this light. And the third one is what we call the incandescent light. So it really depends on your customer, it really depends on application, which light source they have to use. But for food application, for other application, we always start with D65, because this D65 is the one that closest simulates to the sun, and this is the most neutral illuminant. Okay. So if you look at the color spectrum, the best way to understand it, why some color changes their appearance because of the light source. So if you look at your color under CW light, if you have a yellow color, it will be more emphasized because you have a lot of yellow energy here. But the red will be suppressed. Okay, so if you have a red color, it doesn't look red. So that's why when you go to the supermarket, what light source they will use? They will not use the blue CW, and otherwise your fish might like look blue. And blue color for the food is not appetizing. So they always use something with high red energy. Because red is appetizing for the brain. So when you look at the food, in food industry, when they expose in the supermarket, you go to the fresh section, they always use what we call the incandescent light. They will never use the blue light. Because blue light will enhance the blue energy. And the blue energy to the brain doesn't look appetizing. So they will use the red light. Yeah. So actually color, if you are a marketing person and if you want to present your product, light plays a very important role in selling your product. Okay, because all this light will emit certain specific energy that will enhance the energy of your product. So that's why this is very important in color science. So just take for example this object here. So you have the daylight, you have the CWF, you have the incandescent. If you notice the incandescent, the red becomes more red, while the red here is being suppressed. It looks appear blue as compared to the red here. Even the other color also. Like you see here, the yellow is a little bit bluish, but you see the yellow here suddenly becomes more bright. So really, light plays a very important role in color viewing. So depending on the object also, how do we measure the object? So most object will always what we call, depending on the physical structure and chemical composition of the object, it will do what we call reflective and transmission of spectral energy across the visible wavelength. In order to get the reflected and absorbed light, we need to use what we call a spectrophotometer. This is a spectrophotometer, and this will measure the reflected light and can measure also what we call transmitted light. And to do that, so let's say I have this device, I want to measure the red color. So what does this device will do? First, you position your device on top of the sample you want to measure. And then this has a lamp, this has a light energy that will be converted into what we call spectral curve. This curve will provide us what we call the DNA of color. This curve represents the DNA of color. And that light represents what we call the absorbed light, which this red color absorbed, and this red color is reflected. So what you see is red because the red energy is being reflected, while the other color, the 7 other color, is being absorbed by the material. So this machine actually profiles your color. So once you make the DNA, that's the DNA, that's the permanent DNA of your color using this device. And this is what we call represent the basic or the raw component of color. Meaning you have this object, that's the DNA. No matter what, even though it will change the appearance, this composition will not change anymore because that is the DNA of color. It will change the moment you expose this to the light and the moment you look at the color under that particular light condition. But this will never, because this represents your recipe, your formulation by means of color. So whatever recipe you have there, whatever composition you have there, that is already a representation of your product. And this is what we call a spectral curve. And we always use the spectral curve because the spectral curve will always help us determine what kind of dyes that we use, what kind of recipe that we use, because especially for the dyes only, because this is very, what we call very specific. Not all colors will have what we call a very specific curve. So if we go into general, every color will have their specific curve. So let's say this is a green color. The green color is on the center because across the visible wavelength, the green is on the center. That's why this is a green color because the reflected light is green, while some part of the blue and some part of the yellow and red light is being absorbed. So you have the red here, while you have the gray light because the gray is between the white and the black, so it becomes neutral. So all reflected light will have 100%. This is what we call the white light, and all that is absorbed is what we call the black. So there is no reflected light because it's black. So that's why we have here one straight line. But the red, the green, and the blue color, some part of the light will be absorbed, some part of the light will be reflected. So that is the DNA of color, and this is what we call the generic or the normal curve. So for me, I don't need to see physical sample. If I look at the curve, I know already that we are talking about red, we're talking about gray, because you become so used of looking at this curve. So for you, it becomes more like a natural way of determining the color by curve. Okay, so what is the practical example? Why do we need to measure color? If you look at the background here, and I have two objects here. So if I move this object going to the left, and another is going to the right, you see the appearance changes already, just because of the background. So, meaning, if you don't measure it, how can you communicate to your customer? Customer is the background that is changing, but the product is still the same. It's the background that affects your measurement. So let's go back again. So very similar color. If you move to one background, this appears lighter, and that appears darker. So the appearance is changing. The same color, but the appearance. This is what we call appearance. Your product is not changing, but the way you present it may be changing. That's why when the customer look at it, they might think it's changed, but actually for you, because you're the one make it, they said, how come it's changed? Probably it's the environment, maybe something to do on how you present the sample. That really affects your color perception. Okay, so that's why we need to measure, because measurement will tell you exactly if you have a different product or if you have a similar product. So, and the curve also, for a lot of other applications, sometimes depending on your process, it can also detect the fluorescent effect. You know, some of the clothes that we wear, especially white. Remember when you buy the powder, sometimes you see a lot of bluing agent on the powder, because the powder will kill the yellowness on the white. That will appear the white to become clean because of those bluing agent. And spectrophotometer can check the bluing agent. When you measure fabric, when you measure paint, or those white material, to be able to become more clean, they add some component. And spectral curve can detect what we call the fluorescent effect. Okay, another thing also for the spectral curve, because DNA, when you say DNA, you're matching. And we see some color may appear close in one illuminant, but not in another illuminant. Like, for example, this two color here. This two color here, and this is the blue light is here. These two color under fluorescent lamp will become similar. They will appear the same. But once you look at this color here under incandescent, they will look different because the curve is not exactly the same. So you know that there is difference in your formulation in terms of color. Something has triggered the change. Okay? That's why this is more like profiling. You have to measure those samples. Let's say those samples, once you determine this is your standard, then that is the color of your sample. So if there is a changes, then you easily know where are those changes happen. If let's say another batch comes in, then you look at those curves, and those curves will tell you exactly if they are very similar, if you're looking at the same product or not. Okay, because we look at the. So that's how important is the spectral curve for color matching. Now, what about the eyes? How the eyes plays the important role? Our eyes actually have different sensitivity depending on one person. So our eyes, what we call, has already what we call the blue and green and red sensitivity. We know sometimes that by experience we know, oh, I think I'm good in blue, I think I'm good in red, I think I'm good in green color, right? Certain color you are good because it really depends on how those cones are playing or how many are the ratio. And we have also one part of the retina, which is the rods. So when you go to a movie house, even though it's very dark, then afterwards you are able to adjust. You can suddenly see something a little bit, but it will take 20 minutes before your eyes can adjust to see something. Sometimes you feel it when you go inside a dark room, maybe suddenly you will not see, but then your eyes is adapting, and then the rods is already working. But if there is light, it's the cones that is working. Okay, so the light will go in. So when you look at this color, the light illuminates this color, and then we don't know that that light going to your eyes, okay, you will receive that light and it's being processed by your brain. So here the experience is working. However, that sample that are you looking really depends on the size. If you have a small sample and a big sample, your eyes also change the perception. Okay, so how does it look like? Okay, so this science, what they did, they just determined, so what they did, they measured this, what we call the opening. So when your eyes is looking at the object, we have what we call the 2-degree and 10-degree observer, meaning you don't really see it like working, but actually try to experience. When you look at your thumb, okay, you see your eyes is suddenly focusing on you, and that is the 2-degree observer. Okay, that is what is working. Your eyes suddenly, the viewing angle becomes 2-degree observer. But when you move your hand, put your palm up, now you want to look at the bigger size, and that is a 10-degree observer. So the sample size really affects your color vision. It's the same hand, right? The same hand. So this is a smaller object, this is a bigger object. Okay. So this is what we call the field of view. Remember, in camera, right? If you want to look along an image that is white, you use a smaller, a sensitive lens where you need to focus. Then your focus become a smaller field of view. So this is what we call the 2-degree and 10-degree observer. In color science, this is very important because when you measure the small and the big object, your eyes also changes the sensitivity. Okay, so there is a slight difference. This just tells you what is the difference between the 10-degree and the 2-degree observer. So the 10-degree has a bigger field of view, and it's more sensitive than the 2-degree of view. So what is the practical example? So normally, let's take a situation. You notice an object that is 20 or 10 to 20 meters interests you. So sometimes you see an object and you say, okay, I think this object looks good, the color looks good. Then you move closer to the object. two things can happen. It will increase your curiosity and make you interested, or it will disappoint you and totally lost the interest. Because your perception, when you look at quite a distance, you say that is quite good. I think it's good. Then when you go inside, then you take a look at deeper and say, oh, this is not what I want. Okay? So that's why the size and the distance is very important. Okay? So when we look at the color, that is very important. So for us, if your customer give you a very small sample, avoid it. Because that is what we call guessing. Guessing. Let's say in graphics, very, very important. Sometimes the customer will just fill up something out of the paper and they will give it to the designer and say, this is the color I want. But when that color becomes bigger, this is not what I want. Okay? But actually they are just the same color. But the one has a bigger field, one has a smaller field. So even your sample, try to look at your sample at a smaller quantity and at a bigger quantity. There is a slight difference there. Okay? So that is what we call the 2 degrees of separation. So right now, we need to put them, because how will you express color in a curve? How will you press the color with the light? And how will you express the color using your view? So we need to put them together in a single number. And this single number, we call it the CIEXYC, or known as the C-lab. So this is now how we convert the measurement. So the C-lab is actually a 3-dimensional that tells you the lightness of the color. So from the black to light, okay, that is L. And then A represent the red and the green of the sample. So we have the positive and negative side. The negative is the green, the positive is the red, and we have the B, which is the yellow and the blue. So we call this as a color mapping. So mapping in color is expressed by LED. So this LED, 3 numbers, define the color in the color space. So it's like an Earth. Earth has north and south, east and west. So color also is also the same. We also have the north and the south, the east and the west, and we have the altitude and the longitude. Okay, so that is also color. So if you look at this way, so let's put it in a more what we call 2-dimensional, and it's very difficult to look at the color in 3-dimensional. So we try to break the lightness. So just, it's like a sphere. This is a sphere, right? This is like a sphere. So if you put it on the center, this is your white, this is your black. Then you have the south, you have the west, and then you have the east, and you have the north. Okay? So this one is the lightness. And every color can move either in one direction. So if you have a red color can become yellow or can become blue in shape. When you look at red color, sometimes become yellow or sometimes become blue. If you have a green color, it can go to a yellow tone or it can go to a blue tone. So your color will always keep moving. Okay, depending on the standard. Where is your standard is located in this color space. So how does it look like? So okay, once we measure it with this device under specific daylight and under specific observer, it will be converted into LED coordinate unit. So for you, actually, it's all calculated and we communicate color now in terms of the LED. So if I have a rain paint here, this red paint here has a yellow tone, although we say this is a red. But this has a red tone, and this is an orange paint because this has a, they call it an orange paint because this paint here has a little bit of the red and the yellow. So every color has a equivalent LED coordinate. So when you measure that color you have, you really need to measure what is the LED of that color. And once we know the LED of every color that you have, then we can make what we call color difference. So we measure this color under this specific daylight, and then we measure this color under specific daylight. And once we measure this, we take the difference. Okay, so this is how it is. So we measure, the standard has an L value and A value and B value. The trial has an L value, A value and B value. Then we look at the difference. Okay, so the difference, yes, is a difference, maybe a little bit complicated. The difference is that we determine how light is the color, whether your color becomes lighter or darker, whether your color becomes reddish or greenish, whether your color becomes bluish or yellowish. So it gives you direction. Okay, that is better because right now it's easily for you to communicate the color, because when you see the color becomes yellowish, everybody will see the yellow. And now for you, now the next step is to determine how yellow is the yellow, how red is the red. Okay, so because that gives you a direction. Unlike before, it's just guessing. I said my color is red, yeah, but how red is red. Okay, how blue is blue. So this is one way of telling you exactly where is your standard or where is your sample now against your standard. And then we need one number to determine the direct distance between the sample and the standard. And this direct distance, we call it the DE. We call it the overall color difference. That overall color difference comes from the difference in lightness, the difference in A, and the difference in B. So at least it's more precise. So what is the practical attribute? So here, when your when your DL is positive, it means lighter. If it's negative, it means darker. Okay, when your DA is positive, it means more green or less red, and then so on. If it's negative, and DB also. So this is more precise of communicating color because it gives you the exact location of your color. Okay, so how does it work? Okay. Okay. So here, if you first start to communicate with DE, if your DE is less than or between 1 and 2, we call it a small color difference. Okay? If your DE is larger than 3, we call it's a very big color difference. So you can see here, these two color here is between 1. Okay? So visually, they are acceptable. When your colors start to reach delta D of 2, then you know it's far. Then it becomes, and higher than 2, it's really very far. So if I am a supervisor and your people measure the color, so you just ask them, what is the DE now? And the DE, they said, it's 3.5. You know that there is a correction. So you can, don't stop. We need to do something to improve this because we are not yet within that acceptable limit that the eyes cannot detect color difference. Okay? So that is one way of making make your decision faster in terms of color because you follow certain number now. Say anything below 1 or anything below 2, I will not accept. Anything above 2, you need to improve it because it means that color is not yet within the acceptable limit that the eyes can detect. And this is, then once you know this DE value, then if you want to improve, the operator will know exactly how to improve because it tells them whether that difference comes from the lightness, it's just a matter of light and dark, or really come from your recipe, which is the A and the B. Because when you mix all those colors, you use certain dyes, right? And you know what are those dyes that will affect the redness, the blueness, the greenness, and the yellowness of the color. Then you know exactly how to make the adjustment. Because when you make the adjustment, it's difficult to guess. If I am darker, I cannot no longer take the dyes because it's already here, there. So what do? Then you have to think about that will reduce the darkness. Maybe, and then you look at your recipe, what are those recipe that affects the darkness of my color? Maybe, I don't know how you add or how do you reduce those color difference that you see. Maybe you add some white powder, make it look lighter because the white will reduce the darkness. Or maybe you add some kind, maybe it's dark but it's more red, so maybe adding a little bit of yellow or a little bit of blue will reduce the redness of the color. And this you can look at it by doing this LED difference also. Okay? Because this will tell you where is your direction at the moment, and then if you want to improve, which direction you have to go. Because if it's lighter, then you need to go darker. If it's darker, then you need to go lighter. If it's more red, then you need to be maybe less yellow, or maybe you need to be more green. So that is what the system can do. Okay. So this is a good indicator in determining how big is the color difference. Okay. So any question? It's a little bit technical, but it's better to see.
Thank you. So right now we can have a Q&A section, or have a real, or before we have a real test, maybe you can ask any question. We are seeing this Irene here. So Irene actually have 19 years experience in
I'd like to see a demonstration.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Actually, when I look at your sample here, the volume will affect your measurement. So the best way really is to have a holder. If you use this device, we have what we call an optical container, where you can put your sample inside, and that we can measure through that optical container. Because the volume will affect. Just imagine if I have this is the opening. So when I measure this, because you put the pressure, then the tendency the sample will get flat. And if the volume is not consistent, then the color definitely will change. Right? So here we need a container. You need what we call a holder to position the sample properly. Now, not all glass can work because some glass is too thick, some glass is too thin. So the key point in color measurement, you need to be consistent in terms of presentation, so you can get consistent result. Even visually, if you are not also consistent, the way you visually look at the color, it will also keep changing. So everything, first you need to make sure the procedure is consistent. Okay, so I can take some measurement here now. Okay, so let's measure this sample. Okay, normally what we do, because I set this up to be 24 hours a week, so I need to calibrate the machine first, and the machine is actually calibrated with the white and the black. Because, remember, color comes from the white and with black. That's why we have the white and the black type. So what we do here, the device will tell you exactly what to do. And then you just position. So you maintain the pressure, and then afterwards you measure the black drop. Okay. Okay, so now the machine is ready. So calibration is completed. We do this once a day. We don't have to do this. Once the machine is already calibrated, it will stay calibrated for 24 hours. It can stay calibrated for 48 hours also. Okay, so once we are ready, then we just say check, okay, and then I can take my measurement. Okay, so let's say I want to measure my standard. So actually you can set up we have here a quick compare. I just go to a very quick compare also. Because this QA, you can make a standard. You can store 1,000 standard, and and 4,000 samples inside this device. So I just want to do a quick compare. So we just go to quick compare. Okay, I'm doing the quick compare right now. Okay, so now I measure my standard. We just measure the same sample here. Okay, so now I have this value. So you can see here A is positive and B is positive. So this is an orange color. Correct or not? Right? It's like an orange color. Okay? And then if I compare this side to that side, so we have what we call difference in terms of the color. So this has a 1.0 difference. Okay? So your color here and color here. Yeah, the eyes can accept. So 1.0 is still okay. Right? It can, so it really depends. Now, where is the similar sample? Is this one? Okay, so let's measure here. I know there is a, this has effect because the plastic is different from here. Okay, then we'll try to measure this right now. Okay, I will measure this as my sample. Okay, it's not much different. It's 1.0. Okay, but you have to look at the difference. So this becomes slightly darker. So this is positive A, this is slightly red, and slightly yellow. But not much difference. Okay. So that's how you. So first you need to determine the process or presentation. Then maybe this we can measure also. Is this
Yeah. Different system.
okay. So we compare this. This. Okay. Alright. So now I will measure my standard. So I will measure my. This is my standard. This is okay. Or which standard can be? Okay. Actually, there is some air here, so the air will affect the measurement. That's why we really need a good way of position. Okay, so you see here, that's your measurement right now. Okay. And then we compare this. Maintain the pressure because I did not maintain the pressure. I'm changing. So say you maintain the pressure, you have an error in measurement. So the machine is a bit sensitive. Okay, let me measure this again. Okay. So, yeah, because I measure again this one. This again. See, there is an air here, so okay, 1.34. Okay. It's more red. Actually, it says here more red, darker. green side, because the A, and then that's the B. And then slightly lighter on, but it's more on color. This is a color problem, okay? Because this has a different recipe than, because lighter and darker is okay, because it's something to do with presentation. But the once you see the changes in A and B, that is an indication of recipe, color recipe problem. Because it's too high on the B, which is yellowish, and also on the A, which is now going towards the B. So if you want to correct this, you have to correct this by adding more red. So again, I
Now,
will,
our problem is our customer are what color? We don't have
We
the
propose the range.
Yeah, they don't have the range. They want to.
So you
yeah, that's why you need to determine which one the customer will accept to you. Because you don't know. That's why here, the good thing about here, you have a data that will support what your customer is thinking.
But
Unlike
our
before.
customer don't have this.
No, it's okay. You don't have to tell them, but at least internally you know how to control. Okay.
Maybe the creative one.
Yeah.
You prepare the spec.
Yes.
This.
Yes, because actually right now, if you know what the specs and
Because now we just saw the sample maybe for 1 year, then the color will change. Then
Definitely.
that's why we cannot compare.
Exactly.
Our previous batch, yeah.
That's why you need to do the measurement now, because you know what is good before.
Yeah.
Okay, and what is good now, or what is why is not, why is it changing? So at least you have some record. Because one thing about color measurement is about data collection. It allows you to collect the data and use the data to analyze the performance of your product. And because with that data, you will incorporate the recipe, you will incorporate a lot, because you are forced now to document. And then once you have those documentation, you have the data, then you can always come back and compare. So what are the difference before? And how is different right now? And maybe color is something that you always take it for granted because it is the last in the process. That is always in the last, but it is what your customer always check. Maybe last in the production, but to know the quality of the product, the first thing they see is color.
Because the problem is our raw material. The color is not consistent. Then, so every time we produce the product, we need to add.
That's okay,
Yeah,
that's normal.
different.
Actually, that's normal. That's why what you need to do is to create a range.
To ensure the end product one is similar.
Yes, you
From
need
different
to.
batch.
Exactly,
Yeah.
you need to make a range.
Yeah.
Okay, because once you cannot control the raw material, that's
Yeah.
given already. But at least you have a range on how to correct.
How is the liquid form sample?
Liquid is same. You need to put it in a holder, optical holder. Actually, this device actually comes with what we call a holder, and then we have the optical glass. You just position, because you see here that is an opening. Make sure it touches. So we have this flat square glass here in front where you can measure the liquid. And that liquid also, because again, color changes, it depends on the volume. So we need to make sure those volume are always equally presented. Just like this. So you see, we can measure the liquid. You can use the same. You can measure it that way also. So we have the holder that will hold the liquid. You just need an accessories to be able to do that.
Does the viscosity mean the liquid will
Okay.
affect?
Yes, yes, because the viscosity also changes the color. Even pellets, we also measure pellets. Actually, I made one for Ajinomoto. Ajinomoto, they asked me to make a sample, but that is physical sample using our hand cell. They use our hand cell. They send the sample to the US, and the US made the physical standards for them.
How's the coffee pot?
That's the same. They say the same. You need to measure. Actually, here, What you just need to do is to make your own standard first. And then once you make your internal standard, then that's how you know the variability of your process. Every standard you have to create. But there are certain standards that are made already in the US using Mansell. Then you can also use that, but sometimes it really depends. Because like in the US, they measure the orange, quality of the orange. They don't use this device. They specify a big spectrum photometer. And in that style, they measure the orange juice up. So they have an index to follow. Even French fries, you can also measure the French fries after it cooks. McDonald's also have a physical way of checking it. It's all also part of our services. So what they do, they give us a sample and then we make all those standards for them. And then once they make the standard, they start measuring it and then that becomes the standard. So for you, you have to determine, let's say if this is the standard, this is the color that most of your customer will accept, then you have to, maybe you have several samples, because you can do average. You can do an average of all the measurements. Let's say if you have 100 samples, then you can take the average representation of that standard. You can have what we call a master sample. Under that master standard, these are all those standards that are passed. Then you can get the range. But again, you need to make a presentation. This is okay for me, but my problem here is consistency. If you can make a way to put it in this plastic bag, consistent way of presentation, as long as it's consistent, is not. But the most important is to determine first. Okay, maybe you put this in one container. You can also make, or you can also make your own create your own method of measurement also. Maybe I would suggest if you put this something in a elevated what you call elevated stand, then if you can create your own insert, because what you need is just a very thin glass, like the microscopic glass. Microscopic glass is very thin, right? The problem with microscopic is so narrow. I have not seen that it's a little bit bigger or wider to make sure the positioning really covers this opening. But you can improvise definitely.
Because this product you export to the US, then I want to know the food method in the measurement. Is it recognized in
Yes.
US or
We have customer in the US, but actually they are not using this device. We call it the NAC. There is also another device. We call it the NAC Contact OBS 450. They also use, actually in the US, they use the LED method to check the color. But it's all about presentation. For you, first thing you need to know is to determine the presentation. I mean, to standardize your method of presentation. Because they all use LED. LED now is a method of color communication. This is how they communicate color now.
so far we try to set up external lab because we want to get maybe accredited the result for customer. So what I think I like a lot that they will not provide this kind of
Yeah, they will not, because it's still visual assessment at the moment. Right now, there are several methods. One method is they use the what we call the Mansell. Mansell is what we call the a standard method of making a standard. Okay, so we make the physical sample for them using nitrocellulose paint actually. So let's say we send this sample to us, and once they send the sample, they will make the color very similar to this, and they will ask you to check it visually first. So once you approve that color, and that color you measure, then that becomes your standard. So every color now that comes in will be measured against that standard. Now, if you want this to become your standard, then you need to determine your method. That's why the best method is really to have a holder. And that's the only way, because volume also affects your color measurement. And because here, if just imagine if you press it like this, maybe looks lighter, unlike with if it's in an optical glass, then at least you are assured that your measurement method is always consistent.
We also want to ensure the missing homogeneous the for
Yes.
content, the right center.
Exactly, because
Center then multiply.
yes, has to be homogeneous, because if it's not, it's will your measurement, it will confuse you more.
Yeah.
So here, the critical is the presentation. Once you determine the process, the presentation, then it becomes consistent, then it's easy for you to know the variability. Then they will take over.
It's very useful.
Yeah, actually it's
Yeah,
very
now we can,
useful.
During production, we can spot
Yes, on the spot,
Check.
because right now you can easily
immediately
check.
and
Immediately you
contact
can
market,
always check.
yeah.
But you really need to establish that method, because here the first thing you have to do is to establish a standard. Once you know that this is your
Yeah.
standard, then you check your variability before you go to the production. Because you really need, the good thing about this is like an RTT, it will allow you to create what are those variables coming from. Let's say you change your temperature, whether that temperature affects the A, the B, or the lightness. If it's lightness, it's okay. Lightness is the easiest way of determining, because light is light and dark only. But the A and B, that is process variability. That is formulation variability, because that affects the color. And that is what we see first.
And this method we can measure the existing product, the condition is okay or not. But sometimes we store, we send to customer maybe 1 month or something to customer.
Definitely.
According to the storage condition, then maybe 6 months they still complain. Then this is one of our issue the
Yes.
issue. Then
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why I said one of the problem if you the conventional is the physical sample.
Yeah.
It's always changing. When you submit it to the customer, it's totally different, because this sample, when exposed to environment, is oxidized. Yeah, it happens. You cannot avoid unless you have what we call a humidity control room, where you can put it in a wrap that is controlled temperature and controlled humidity, then there will be less variable color
We
change.
saw the mechanism.
Yeah. Yes.
We can send information.
Yeah.
The nation. Okay.
Yeah. Try to study. Yeah. If you need more information, we can provide you more information. I can give you some reference that are using our equipment already for our evaluation. Some spices, actually, I have founded one
So
of
this
our
the dish issue, we need to send external calibration or just
Actually,
Yeah.
this calibration,
internal
okay,
verification.
this has to be done on a daily basis
Daily
or
basis.
every week,
Yearly.
depending on how you set the instrument. But on a yearly basis, normally, let's say you forgot to send this for calibration, don't
Okay.
let it stay for 3 years. Okay, after 3 years, before 3 years, you need to send to us for calibration again, because this has a lump, and the lump, yeah, it has a toxin. Actually, if you measure it like this, you will see some of the you will see some light coming out, because this is like a camera technology actually. So if I make the measurement, yes, this mimics like the sun, see? Because the light comes from the sun, right? And it's the sunlight that is responsible for the color. So this one mimics the sun. And then this is what we measure, the DNA, the spectral curve. And that color also, when we have the color, now the next step is how you are going to look at the color. So now it depends on your illuminant. That's why this software has also many illuminant. So you have P65, because you have the color, then you can look outside under the sun, and the sun is not always there. Okay? That is one. I would suggest also for you, we have another way to control the visual matching is a light bulb. because that light would really very consistent. The light would will allow you to look at the color under 3 different illumina and under controlled environment because it's gray, it's a wood. I don't know if you have the brochure. And under that, you can look at your color. That is one way of visual inspection. Because if you look at your color under different, you cannot get a consistent way of looking at it even visually.
Oh,
Yes. Because that is under controlled environment. Yeah. Maybe you can start with that. It's a good method of visual evaluation because you control the light also. Not only for your sample, even for a lot of your packaging also, you can also look at any color, you can easily look at it.
quality itu. Okay.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.